welcome to Restless Chipotle Kitchen. Today we're making Day of the Dead bread. It's a celebratory bread made in Mexico and other Hispanic countries, and maybe other countries, I don't know. But it's lightly sweetened with just a little anise flavor, and it's made for November 1st and 2nd when the families celebrate their relatives that have passed on and give them honor. And so we're making that today. It is delicious. Whether or not that's part of your culture, it's a delicious bread anytime. And let me tell you, it makes amazing French toast. It's beautiful and cakey with a beautiful crust on it. So let's head over to the kitchen so y'all can get started on this. Okay, y'all, the first thing that we're gonna do, just like with any sort of bread, is we're going to proof our yeast. So I'm putting in 1/4 cup of warm water. You want it to be like almost bath water or no more than 110 degrees. And then to that, I'm gonna add a package of active dry yeast. And then to that, I'm going to add about a tablespoonful of sugar. And then I'm going to mix it up, let that yeast grow. So I'm going to set that aside to foam up. Now, the next thing we need to do is, remember, everything needs to be at warm temperature, or at least room temperature or warmer when you're working with a yeast dough. And so I'm going to take 1/4 cup of milk, and I'm going to heat that up, and then I'm going to put this butter in and melt it. So I'll be back in just a minute. Now, right now, the milk is too hot to mix in with the yeast, but once I put this butter in there and it starts to, ooh, made a mess there, didn't I? Once I put this butter in there and melt it, the temperature is gonna be just about right. So I'm gonna break up the butter a little bit just to make sure that it melts down good. And we're gonna set that aside to finish melting. I'm gonna take the eggs and I'm gonna beat those up. The eggs are at a warm room temperature. Like I said, I want everything to be at room temperature. We'll set those aside. Now, this is my mixer bowl. And to that, I'm going to add 1 cup of the flour. Next goes in the gluten. And if you don't have gluten flour, don't worry about it. You can do this without it. The gluten flour adds more protein to the flour, and it helps it rise. It helps it stay, the crust to stay crisp and the inside to stay tender. It'll be fine with all-purpose flour if you don't have the gluten. Or if you have bread flour, you can use half all-purpose flour and half bread flour for this. Then the anise. And I use anise seeds, but you can use ground anise, or you can leave it out completely if you don't like that flavor. And then the rest of my sugar. About 2 tablespoons of or 2 teaspoons of orange peel. And this, I don't know, I don't measure it that carefully. It's about what you're gonna find on a whole orange. And finally, I'm going to add salt. Now, this is kosher salt. If you're using table salt, then you're gonna wanna use about half as much as the recipe calls for. And then I'm going to add the milk mixture, which has the melted butter in it. I'm going to add our yeast mixture, which has started to foam up. And I'm going to add the eggs. I'm going to stir that up. Now, you can do this by hand, but I don't like hand kneading anymore. So what I'm gonna do is go over to my mixer, and I am going to use it to blend in the rest of the flour. and scrape the dough off the sides. And we want a soft dough, but we don't want it to be so sticky that it can't be kneaded or worked with. When it starts to form a ball, I'm going to take the paddle off of it and add the dough hook. Keep in mind that you may need more or less flour. It depends a lot on your weather, it depends on the brand of flour. It can change from time to time. So what you want to watch for is the dough being the right texture. This dough is still way too sticky, and so I'm going to add a little bit more flour. Really nicely. It's elastic, so it's been kneaded enough. So now what I like to do is I like to knead it by hand the rest of the way. So I'm going to flour my surface and then just knead the dough by hand for just a couple of minutes, just to make sure that it's got enough flour in there, it's the texture that I want, and it's ready to go. I can feel the stickiness of the dough and I can see how it tears a little bit, but it's very elastic. So I know that it is ready to rise. Now this dough will rise for an hour to 2 hours. It depends a lot on the temperature of the room, all kinds of things. You want it to rise until it's double in size. And you'll be able to tell that when you stick watch this. So if I stick my finger in, see how the dent pops back out? When it's doubled, that dent will stay in there. So I'm gonna grease my bowl with a little butter, or a lot of butter as the case may be. I'm going to put my ball of dough in there and turn it to grease it and cover it up, and that will go in a warm place for an hour to 2 hours. Check it after an hour, and then if it doesn't seem like it's risen quite enough, let it go for up to another 2 hours. So I'll see y'all in about an hour. All right, y'all, it has risen double at this point in time. I can put my finger in it to the first knuckle. It doesn't pop back out. I can tell that it looks like it's risen, more than it was. So it's time to start shaping the loaf. So I'm going to punch this down, and punching down is actually kind of a misnomer. Most of the time, especially with a rich dough like this, you don't want to punch it down so much as gently deflate it. And this bread is easier if you'll shape it right on your cookie sheet. I'm going to take about 1/3 of the bread, and I'm going to separate it out. And then I'm going to shape this into a smooth round loaf. Have parchment or have silpat on there so it's easy to get off. I'm going to set this aside for a little bit, and I'm going to separate this out into several pieces. Everything is kind of symbolic. So the decorations that we put on here represent bones, and the way that we put them on represents the circle of life. There's a lot of ways to do this. You want these to kind of represent bones, and a lot of people put little knobs on them and all of that. I'm always just happy to get them on the bread. Okay, I'm going to push that down. what I'm doing is I'm putting my finger in here and kind of pushing it so that it really conforms. And then I'm going to put a knob on the top, which stands in for the skull. And then with this piece, I can make designs around the edges of the bread. And there's that. Now, we're gonna cover it and we're going to let it rise for about another hour before we bake. So our Day of the Dead bread has risen, it's light. When you see in a recipe when it says to let the dough rise until it's light, you literally can feel a difference in the weight of the dough on the baking sheet. So that's another way to tell that it's risen enough. Now on the blog, I've got an orange glaze that goes on this, but today I am just using 1 egg yolk and 1 tablespoon of water, and I'm just gonna brush that on. That's gonna give it a nice golden color and without adding a lot of sweetness. This is kind of a sweet bread and it's delicious with the orange glaze, but I just wanted to do it this way this time. You wanna be able to get just as much of the surface as you can with that. That's not gonna give it any flavor, but it should give it just a very rich color, one that's baking, and a nice crust. And you want to do this very gently so that you don't disturb the dough and cause it to deflate. Now I'm going to sprinkle on just a little bit of sugar just to glaze it, a little bit. And it'll go into a 350-degree oven for about 30 minutes, 30 to 40. It's been 30 minutes in the oven, and see how glossy the crust of this is. It's got this pretty gloss on it. That's from that egg wash that I put on there. All right, y'all, here we go. I'm gonna cut into this and so you can see the texture of the bread on the inside. Then we'll head over to the table. Ooh, still a little bit warm, but can you see how soft and cakey that is? It's so soft, and it's just slightly sweet with that great anise flavor, and the crust is just beautiful and kind of crispy. Just really, really yummy stuff. Even if you aren't celebrating Day of the Dead or any other holidays, this is a great bread for any time. It's just delicious. This rich dough is best eaten on the day that it's made. By the second day, it's starting to get a little stale. So if you're not going to eat it all at once, go ahead and wrap it up and freeze it. This will freeze beautifully for up to about 3 months, and then you can have it anytime. So delicious, rich, soft, good. I am gonna go, and I will see y'all next time. Don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube channel. Check the blog. I know I didn't put a glaze on it this time, just the egg wash, but on the blog, I've got a recipe for an orange glaze that's delicious on it. So good. And don't forget to come back next week because I'm gonna have something else that you're just gonna love, all right? I love y'all. Talk to you later. Bye-bye. What was I gonna say? Oh, bread's good though.